Okay, everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have an awesome follow-up for you from the brand Direnzo. A little bit about them. They were founded back in 2015. They are a Swiss-made brand, and basically they're a micro-brand startup with a very unique design aesthetic that is really akin to kind of that mid-century race car and aircraft look, but just with their own really cool retro twist going on. So very nice from that standpoint. Now, a little bit about this type of watch. I'd consider this a dive watch, of course. Some key common characteristics and design language when you're looking for a diver. Of course, you're going to want water resistance. So you'll through some type of screw down crown. You're going to want something that's tough, legible, with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelet. What we have here is the Direnzo DRZ03 Eclipse, and this is the blue dial model with the date. And why did I choose the date over the no date model? Well, because it's the Eclipse, and one thing I think that's really cool about it is that the seconds hand actually eclipses that date window in a really fun and interesting way, and that it doesn't affect the indice sizes or anything like that. It doesn't throw off the dial in terms of the balance, or it's not disruptive or anything like that. It's just there, right? It's there when you need it. And here we go for the Eclipse. Bam. So I don't know, there's something that's oddly satisfying about that. So every minute I can go ahead and look forward to that moment. Now, these are currently sold out. I'm not sure if they're going to do more runs of these, but I did want to give you guys an update. These went for, or at least they were actually able to, I think on Kickstarter, for much cheaper, but the full price was 665 Swiss francs, which comes out to about 740 US dollars. And yeah, this one was a pretty cool one, so I wanted to follow up with you guys because I did show you their very interesting pre-production prototypes, and here we have a production unit. So although they're not for sale right now, this might be a little bit more for those owners out there, and maybe for future runs, or just other people that are catching on to this brand for the first time. So with that said, let's go ahead and zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand for a closer look. All right, guys. So as you can see here, really this dial setup is the star of the show. I think one thing that's really nice is they're actually really able to perfectly color match that bezel insert with the, although it's sapphire, the underpinnings match that center dial perfectly, which of course is the simulated shadow over the sun. So you do have that sun ray pattern kind of behind peeking out. It looks really great. Obviously everything's very balanced, very legible, and quite symmetrical, which is something that is I think always a very nice touch. And then bam, there you go, another little eclipse passes us by. Now for me, apart from this design aesthetic, one thing that was really nice was this case, guys. Look at this case. Look at that beautiful chamfer there. Nice and sharp, great transition, beautifully done brushed side. It's a little bit flat, but it's not a bad looking flat, and it doesn't feel like a slab because it still is relatively thin. This actually is only 12.5 millimeters thick. It is of course a 40 millimeter diameter and is 48 millimeters lug to lug, and that's a true 48 millimeters because you do have the female end links, so you're not really getting any extension on the case. And honestly, the way that these lugs taper and are beveled, it doesn't play in any kind of broad-shouldered maxi way, so it doesn't really extend anything. I think if anything makes this dial or the watch appear larger, it's because you do have the blue on blue combination, so it doesn't really shrink the dial, although your eye can be drawn to the center of the dial because of the contrast. So it plays differently in different ways, but I really like it. And you can see that the coin edge done on there is just about gorgeous. Look how nice that is. It's and then it really ties in obviously to this nice big crown, which is really well executed as well. Let's get some bezel action going. Ooh, that's nice. Okay, yeah, I'm digging that. Not bad at all. Of course I'm wearing gloves, so there's that. But other than that, yeah, I mean, it's easy to grip. It's definitely has more of a kind of a smooth planted feel, so not a lot of looseness in it by any means. This thing feels very tidy and well put together, which is nice. Now, to get into the details, you do, of course, have that double dome sapphire with inner AR coating. You do also have a sapphire bezel insert that is fully lumed. Of course, we already went over the 120 click bezel, and then it does also have that nice screw down crown, of course, as a diver. And then inside, we actually have a Sellita SW200 Elaborate grade with Inca block. So that's nice extra shock resistance there. Unfortunately, you can't see it, but you do have a pretty nicely done solid engraved case back, which is honestly pretty handsome considering, right? So not a bad look there. Not anything that's going to leave an imprint on the back of your wrist or anything, but it's pretty nice. Also, you can see those very useful quick adjust, or quick released, I should say, quick release on there, which is nice to see on one with female end links. You rarely get that. Typically you have a male end link. It was nice that they could work through that, get the female end link. Also, a nice thing that you'll notice is they actually put ramps right where those spring bars go, so that when you're pushing them in and out, you don't have to worry about scratching the case. So really thoughtful from that standpoint, so I'll give them kudos there. In terms of the rest of the bracelet, though, honestly, it is pretty standard kind of 3-link oyster style there. It is screw in, which is great. So you can do this at home, not too finicky or anything like that, which is wonderful. The clasp is very, very basic. It is milled on the folding section, which is nice. And then you do have this kind of double locking folding mechanism, which is, nothing special. So unfortunately, as kind of beautiful and innovative in design it is from this angle, kind of as you stray away from the dial, it gets quite a bit more standard in terms of the bracelet. But also, you can put it on a strap or a NATO, so I guess you can't be too upset. Now, when you look at this dial here, it actually has a nice kind of bowl shape effect to it. You get the contrasting colors as well, contrasting finishes there. It really plays with the light and holds it in a beautiful way. You have a polished handset, and then we also do have Super Luminova BGW9 illuminating everything. We have 20 atmospheres of water resistance, or 200 meters. We have 20 millimeter lugs, which are going to be very useful and flexible in terms of what types of straps you're going to use with this. The bracelet is, of course, also stainless steel, has a nice little 2 millimeter taper going down from 20 to 18 millimeters. And yeah, we even have some micro adjusts there available because there aren't any half links. So you can get this thing dialed in for a nice fit. So with that, let's actually see how this fits on the wrist. All right, guys, as you can see on my 7¼ inch wrist, this little 40 millimeter diameter wears really nicely. It doesn't wear too long because that lug to lug is only 48 millimeters, and the lugs do taper quite a bit and tailor tightly up against those 20 millimeter lugs. And then I think probably the thing that does make it appear a little bit larger, of course, besides the lens distortion on the camera from when I remove my wrist closer to the lens, is that it's just generally the proportions, because it has that thinner bezel and the more expansive dial with the indices pushed more towards the outer portions of the dial. It just makes it look larger. And then, of course, the way the color all ties in, it makes it feel like one large statement versus something that's more compartmentalized, although there are various steps in finish and in the texturing that's done there, as well as the certain shades of blue with the color play. So it's definitely an interesting one. And what I like is, although it really stands on its own, it pops in a really nice way, almost like to the level of like a wild card type of watch, which is, I think, kind of a signature of the Direnzo line's design language, is that they have these watches that are just so bold. They could be kind of these oddball wild cards within your collection. But for this particular watch, because of how beautiful and traditional the case is, like, look at that. I mean, if you didn't see the dial and you just saw this, I mean, this could easily be just another kind of gorgeous big crown homage, but then you look at it and then they just did a completely different approach when it comes to that design aesthetic. So I think that's the kind of fun, interesting thing about it, is that it is so different, but it hits those things that everybody wants in a diver. It's very balanced, very symmetrical, very bold, and quite legible. So with that said, let's actually get some Lume shots and low light transition and get into some final closing thoughts. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit the lights. As you can see, the BGW9 application on this is not stellar. I mean, you really expect more from a diver. I mean, it could be that I just kind of got a weaker example here. I will say that the the white balance on the camera is probably making it appear just a little bit dimmer than it is in person, but I will note that, yeah, this hasn't been a diver that's knocked my socks off in terms of Lume, and typically I can be pretty forgiving when it comes to Lume, but for divers, it's kind of the point, and especially for a watch called the Eclipse, which is all about kind of light. I think that would have been a nice touch, but honestly, for how gorgeous it looks, well lit, you can kind of forgive it, I guess, for not being the brightest in the darkness, because look at what you get when you splash a little bit of light on this dial. My goodness, guys, look at that. Look at the way, whew, that might be worth the trade-off. And even here in this transitional lighting, you can see it still is quite legible. Obviously, those cardinal points. The handset is definitely much brighter in comparison to everything else. The dial being the next brightness, and then the least bright being that bezel insert. So a little tough from that standpoint, but you can see really quite legible in low light, although it's not necessarily due to the Lume, more so just to the bold layout there. One of the reasons I like to do this low light transition is because you're not always going to be out in optimal lighting. Sometimes you're going to be in here's some harsher lighting here, really high contrast, but you can see the way that the light plays over that brushing there pretty uniformly, because my studio lights do tend to kind of wash out those imperfections. Here you're going to kind of see them out on display, and look at the way that dial, just the multi dimension that this dial does. It's the way it captures light, holds on to it. Look here now, you get that dark dot in the middle, and then you have the beautiful rays peeking out. So very interesting, very unique, and just something really different and beautiful. So big fan of that. And then of course you get an idea of how those colors are going to really render, right? Because you see it here and you're like, oh, that's a super bright bold blue. But it's a super bright bold blue if you're out in the middle of a field in direct sunlight, but or these studio lights. But in all honesty, what you saw before is probably a little bit more indicative to what you would experience in real life. The nice thing about the Lume application is that it's extremely white in daylight, which is typically the trade-off. Is something that glows really bright, like a C3, typically it's going to have a greenish tint to it. Here you're not getting that. It is pure white. It glows blue. That's very nice. So there's that, right? So that's a bit of a silver lining there. Now, on the wrist, this thing wears really nice and flat. It oozes so much personality. As far as the model variants go, there's the black dial, blue dial, and a red dial, and you can get those with or without the dates. As far as comparable models go, guys, there are so many sapphire bezel-equipped divers around this price point, above and below. So it's just one of those things that's just really catching on. I might have to do a whole episode just dedicated to just sapphire insert divers, because they're just all executed so differently. It's not quite like ceramic, where there's just kind of one way to do it. With sapphire, I've seen so many different takes on it. So yeah, I think this kind of is inspiring me to do that. Let me know in the comments below if that's something you'd be interested to check out. A big kind of face off and Lume battle for a bunch of divers with lumed sapphire bezel inserts. So, but I mean, out of all those, right, that I would probably compare this to, around this price point, above or below, plus or minus a couple $100, You know, this thing just has that signature take on that modern vintage setup. So it gives you that nice retro vibe, along with the fact that it has these Swiss made attributes. Like it's a nice, well executed watch as well, right? It's not just simply a wild card watch. It's actually a really nicely composed timepiece in general. I mean, it's not luxury level or anything like that. But I mean, that case and the tactile points between the crown and the bezel action are all very, very nice and well sorted. The bracelet itself is a bit more basic, but hey, you know, you got to give them points because they did do the female end link and they did also do some pretty useful quick release spring bars. So I give them props for that. But you know, as far as you know, I don't think this is going to be somebody's grail watch, but I think it's definitely something that a lot of people would find enjoyment within their collection. I'm really just kind of taken by it, even more so than I thought I was going to be. I think the final blue palette that they used was actually really, really good compared to the lighter, kind of brighter tones that they used on the previous ones I featured, which were just pre-production prototypes. So bottom line, guys, if you can find one, I say go for it. And if you already have one, definitely enjoy it. And leave your comments down below. If you like the video, please do it like. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.